All of them were totally deaf, relying on signing. And there was seemed to be a general myth that all deaf people were dumb. They were intellectually handicapped in that. And I always found that as a result, I was always in the bottom level of the class for my age group, regardless of my ability to do anything. And I found that very annoying, that I was labelled as being dumb just because I was deaf.
And they naturally assume that if you're deaf, you can't talk.
My wife and I were in a shop one day explaining something to the shopkeeper. And he wasn't getting through to me what he was saying. And so my wife explained to him that I couldn't hear. Instead of looking at me, he started to look at her and started to talk to her.
Someone asked my father once, "Do you think Kath would like to read at this Mass?" And Dad said, "Well, why don't you ask Kath? She's standing right beside me."
When you meet people the first time, they say, "Oh, hello," and someone introduces you and they say, "Oh, this is Robert." Another person says, "Oh, how are you?" So frustrating.
Then they say, "But we're doing it right, aren't we?" I have to say, "No, you've got to be yourself. By being yourself, I can understand you."
If people sort of begin to realise, well, each deaf person is an individual in their own right, they've got their own things they can hear, can't hear, and have trouble hearing.
There's lots and lots of people out there in the public that really want to learn how to communicate with the deaf, and I was just amazed in the last week just how many people are.
These students are undertaking tertiary education courses at Griffith University in Queensland. All of them are hearing impaired, and all have endless stories to tell about the difficulties they encounter in everyday communication with hearing people. That's often because hearing people find it almost impossible to imagine what it really sounds like to be deaf. Many of us tend to think of deafness as a world of silence, but there are many different kinds of deafness, each of which affect hearing to a greater or lesser degree. Now, we have an effective way of sharing in what deaf people hear with the aid of a hearing loss simulator called HELOS. This is HELOS. It's described as an electronic system allowing a range of hearing losses and associated distortions to be selected to enable us to hear sound very like someone who is deaf or hearing impaired. To put it simply, speech sounds are passed through a circuit via a microphone. Then different types and degrees of deafness are simulated by adjusting the gain, threshold, and distortion controls on the front panel. Before we begin, let's take a brief look at what causes deafness and how it's measured. A pure tone hearing test establishes a person's hearing threshold for different frequencies. Hearing threshold refers to the softest sound that a person can hear. Each ear is tested separately, and these thresholds are plotted on an audiogram. This is an audiogram. The horizontal axis shows the frequency of the sounds presented. Frequency is the number of vibrations per second that are caused by sound waves. These are measured in hertz. We perceive frequency as pitch. The vertical axis shows intensity or strength of the vibrations. This is measured in decibels. We perceive intensity as loudness. On this audiogram, 0 represents the level at which the average young adult can just detect a sound. It does not mean no sound. Now, deafness affects hearing in two ways. It can cause a flat loss, where there is an even effect at all frequencies. Or it can be sloping, with the higher frequencies usually being more affected. Any accompanying distortion of sound reduces the ability to comprehend speech, even when the sound is amplified. There are 4 main categories of hearing impairment: conductive, sensorineural, mixed, and central. Only with a conductive loss is there some possibility of a medical or surgical cure. A conductive hearing loss results from interference with the process of conducting sound waves through the outer and middle ear. It can result from an infection in the middle ear, perforation of the eardrum, or an obstruction in the ear canal. It's usually a flat loss and can be mild to moderate. Sensorineural hearing loss results from damage to the tiny hair cells in the inner ear or to the nerve which connects them to the brain. It's often a sloping loss and is usually moderate, severe, or profound. A mixed hearing loss refers to problems in the inner ear combined with problems affecting the outer or the middle ear. And a central hearing loss results from damage to the nerve pathways to the brain or to hearing centres of the brain itself. Many people with hearing losses can benefit from the use of hearing aids. It's important to realise that a hearing aid does not correct hearing or restore it to normal. A hearing aid adjusts sound by making it louder and can also provide more or less amplification at different frequencies to suit the shape of the hearing loss. Now let's return to the audiogram, which showed us a person's threshold where sounds were just audible. To hear words clearly enough to understand well, it's necessary for the voice to be at about 30 dB above that threshold. Normal conversation averages about 50 to 60 dB, so the person with hearing shown on this audiogram has no difficulty hearing normal speech. When hearing thresholds are lower than about 30 dB, the person begins to have trouble comprehending. Let's take a look at a flat loss, where hearing is affected evenly at all frequencies. Using the hear loss system, we'll begin our demonstration with a very familiar piece of dialogue, a weather report. First, we'll hear it as we normally would, without impairment. Then it'll be repeated twice, simulating a mild and then a moderate flat response.
Here is the weather. The northern districts will remain fine and hot, except for a few showers on the exposed coast and isolated storms on the ranges. The central interior will remain dry and hot, with high to extreme fire danger. Here is the weather. The northern districts will remain fine and hot, except for a few showers on the exposed coast and isolated storms on the ranges. The central interior will remain dry and hot, with high to extreme fire danger. Here is the weather. The northern districts will remain fine and hot, except for a few showers on the exposed coast and isolated storms on the ranges. The central interior will remain dry and hot, with high to extreme fire danger.
Okay, now we'll move on to some examples of sloping loss, where the higher frequencies are more affected. When we look at how the sounds of speech are distributed across the frequencies, we find that vowels are low frequency, and many consonants, especially unvoiced ones, are in the higher frequencies. This means that someone with a hearing loss sloping away in the higher frequencies may miss hearing these consonant sounds. Listen carefully to this next example. First, we'll hear it without any loss, followed by a simulation of a mild to moderate sloping loss.
Griffith is the only university in Australia which provides an extensive support service for hearing impaired students. Service can consist of note-taking, interpreting, tutorial and counselling assistance, and technical devices such as TTYs and FM hearing aids. Griffith is the only university in Australia which provides an extensive support service for hearing impaired students. Service can consist of note-taking, interpreting, tutorial and counselling assistance, and technical devices such as TTYs and FM hearing aids.
Here it is again with a severe to profound loss. Some people experience profound deafness, where the little hearing they do have is mostly in the low frequencies. People with profound deafness have to rely heavily on lip reading or other forms of visual communication like sign language. Lip reading is not easy at the best of times. It requires great concentration and an extensive knowledge of English. In this next example, the dialogue is different. See how much meaning you can extract from this simulation of profound loss. As it's being repeated, we'll alter the degree of sloping loss until it's possible to clearly make out what's being said, this time without the visual cues for lip reading.
Tomorrow's weather will be similar, composed by pressure gradients from a slowly moving car in the Tasman Sea. Tomorrow's weather will be similar, composed by pressure gradients from a slowly moving high in the Tasman Sea.
Tomorrow's weather will be similar, controlled by pressure gradients from a slowly moving high in the Tasman Sea.
But wait a minute. We rarely hear people speaking in isolation or in a quiet environment like this one. What would it sound like in a crowded room or a nightclub? Finally, let's apply what we've learnt to a typical classroom lecture and see if you can identify what action this teacher could take to attend to the special needs of a hearing-impaired student.
Now, you can tell me other things about the Globe Theatre. Round in London. In London? From the South Bank. From the South Bank. What is the range of that in playing a business now? Well, we used to do a tragic round. Let's talk a little bit about the natural lighting. What do they actually use for lighting? Sunlight? So how does the sunlight actually get into the business?
I always had a tractor. There was always a tractor going in my afternoon classes, always. And the teacher just continually talked and talked and talked. By the end of the lesson, I got nothing out of it. I was totally bored and didn't do anything.
In many classrooms nowadays, you have one big room which is divided by one of those sliding walls. I mean, the noise comes straight through them.
These hearing aids magnify everything. Not only the signal you want to hear, but everything you don't want to hear as well. And there's a big difference between hearing and understanding.
Most hearing people can communicate with sufficient clarity to conduct the business of everyday living, provided they speak the same language. But extra care and the use of a few special communication strategies may be necessary to be understood by those with a hearing impairment. Most deaf people have learnt to adapt to the difficulties of communication in a hearing world. But what can we do? Well, apart from learning sign language, some simple steps can easily be taken. Awareness is the first step. Using the hear loss system, we can begin to appreciate some of the difficulties experienced by people with a hearing impairment and open the doors to a better understanding.
It makes a lot different.
I was lost most of the time in high school because when I was at primary school, I used to copy off the blackboard what they were saying. But when you get to high school, it's all off the mouth, and I was just lost.
Because the teachers would often accuse me of not listening when I didn't understand something. Because it's like Gerald said, they assume, oh, well, he's wearing a hearing aid, so he should be able to hear perfect. But, you know what, there were times when I got kicked out of the classroom for not listening. And I mean, surely that is a self-perpetuating thing.
Have any of you guys had problems with teachers who sort of dictate notes to the class while wandering around the class?
Yeah.
Because there's nothing worse than having people talk behind you when we're depending on lip reading and we have to turn around and face that person.
Yeah, when I was in high school, one thing my Year 11 physics teacher did was really good, because he knew that I was having a lot of trouble with physics, understanding it, was that he would always summarise the lecture first, so maybe a one-page summary, and then he'd photocopy that and hand it out to me at the end.
My teacher, who is supervising me now, has been very, very helpful. And he's got a really bushy moustache and a bit of a beard. And yesterday he said to me, "Can you understand what I'm saying? Because I know I've got a big bushy moustache." And he offered to clip it back a bit. You know, and that's the first time that anyone had ever said something like that to me.